friends, welcome to the Shaggy and Scooby-Doo paint kit. I'm so excited to paint this one with you today. I grew up with Shaggy and Scooby, watching it on TV on cartoons, and I absolutely love it in Lego form, and I love to paint it even more. So let's make sure you have everything set up and we'll go ahead and start painting. So in your kit you have a brown piece of paper, so make sure that's opened up on your tabletop. You also have a blue towel, that's for rinsing our brushes. Inside your kit you have 4 brushes. You've got a large square brush, 2 small square brushes, and a round brush. You have your pre-sketched canvas, and you've got a set of paints. So today I've got 4 paints opened up to start out with, and then halfway through our painting I'm going to open up the other 4 colors that we have. So right now I've got white, yellow, tan, and blue opened up on my plate. You can keep those in the containers if you'd like to, or you can put those on your plate. And then a little bit later I'm going to add brown, sienna, black, and green. So the weather's a little bit funny where I'm painting, so I've kept those in the containers with the lids on because I don't want those to dry out. And then the last thing you need is a glass filled with some water, or a disposable cup filled with some water, so we can rinse our brushes as we go along. So let's get started. If you need time to set up, go ahead and pause the video, and then when you're ready you can go ahead and press play, and then we'll get started together. Alright, so off we go on our adventure. So I'm going to take the original canvas and I'm going to set that aside. Our first step together is going to be adding in our background to the entire canvas. So we're going to create this really cool, bright, fun lemon yellow color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the larger brush in my kit, and you can have a wide square brush or it might be a little bit smaller. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of white and a little bit of yellow, and I'm going to pat those together on my brush. So I'm going to grab a little bit of white and a little bit of yellow, and I'm going to smash those together on my brush. So I've got both colors right on my brush. Then I'm going to come over to my canvas. So what I've got drawn on the canvas is I've got Shaggy over here with this whole top torso of the minifig. Then I've got all of Scooby-Doo over here. So this whole area on the side, and all the way the outline coming down in between, and all the way on the side is going to be the outside of the painting, and a little bit of area right here. And this is the part that we're going to be painting in this lemon yellow. So I'm just going to take my brush with the paint side down, and I'm going to start just filling in all that area. And this is really great, you guys, because when you start out you can really customize the color of yellow that you like. So if you like a really super bright yellow, you can use more yellow paint, and if you want it to be a little bit lighter, you can add more white to it and the color will lighten up. So you can really customize your background. So I'm going to get in here very carefully with my brush, and I'm going to go right around the outline of Scooby-Doo, making this custom color. I love this bright color in the background. As I'm working, I'm going to be very careful, and I'm going to lift up my canvas, and I'm going to grab the very bottom edge right on the outside. So all of this right here is going to be Scooby's body. So I'm just going to grab this outside corner, and then very carefully I'm going to turn the canvas, and all of this outside edge going across is also going to be the outline, all that outside area of my picture. So I'm going to paint these edges on the canvas because when I hang it on my wall, I want the picture to wrap all the way around. Now you don't have to paint the edges if you don't want to. That is perfectly fine. This is your creative painting. So I'm going to very carefully set this back down, and I'm going to work right around Scooby-Doo. So with this custom painting, I added in some dark lines in marker so that we can find those later when we paint with the darker color. So it's all right if you go a little bit over the lines. You just want to be really careful around his eyes because his eyes are painted white on the inside. So we want to be really careful that we don't get any yellow inside those lines. Or his eyes might look a little haunted, like he's seen a ghost, which could happen if you follow the Scooby-Doo series. So I'm just going to be really careful right around those eyes. So as I get towards the top of the painting, I'm going to grab the dry side of the canvas. I'm going to lift up and I'm going to paint that top edge. And then I'm going to very carefully set that down. And then I'm going to work across the top area. If some of these places are hard to get into, you absolutely can switch to a smaller brush and just use the same method. So very quickly I'm going to come right into this hard spot to reach right between Shaggy and Scooby, and I'm going to switch to this smaller square brush. But I'm going to continue to do all the outside first with the big brush, then I'll switch to the smaller one to do the smaller details. Alright, so I'm going to come to the last side of my painting. I'm going to very carefully lift him up. So right here you'll have two pencil marks. This right here is going to be Shaggy's arm. So I'm just going to lay a couple fingers down, and I want to make sure that when I'm painting the side that I don't paint over Shaggy's arm. If you accidentally paint over Shaggy's arm, don't panic, because the tan paint will cover up the yellow. And that is one of the things that I love about acrylic paint, is usually when it dries and we put a darker color over it, it'll cover up anything that we've made if we've done a mistake. And right underneath is also going to be that yellow color. So if we flip our picture upside down between these two lines, this is going to be Shaggy's hand, but this little corner edge, just like we had over here, is also going to be the very bottom of the picture. That is our background. So now I'm going to fill in the rest by Shaggy's head. Great, so I've got a couple spots that are a little bit hard to get into. So I've got the background between his arm and his hand, right by his neck, and then this big area right up in here. So I'm going to take the brush that I've been using. I'm going to kind of wipe off this extra paint that I still have on it. And then I'm going to take my brush over to the rinse water. I'm going to take my brush all the way to the bottom, and I'm just going to move it back and forth. So instead of stirring the brush really hard and causing the water to go up over the sides, I'm going to press my brush down at the bottom and give it a little wiggle. Not too hard and not too fast because we don't want to make a mess with the water. I'm going to bring my towel over to my cup right by my paintbrush, nice and clean, and then I'm going to give my paintbrush a squeeze. And I've got a nice clean paintbrush. So I'm going to switch to the smaller square brush, and using the same method that I did before, I'm going to grab a little bit of white and a little bit of yellow and smash it together into my brush. And then I'm going to continue to paint in some of these harder to reach places. So I'm going to come by Shaggy's head and neck and finish filling in that little background by his neck. I'm also going to come between his arm and his hand. And then I'm going to come right down the center between Shaggy and Scooby. Same technique. And then if I have any raised paint, I'm going to press that down into the canvas. And as my spaces get a little bit tighter, remember there's two ways you can paint with your brush. There's the flat side of the brush, and then there's also the very edge of the brush. So as I get into some of the tight places, instead of painting with the flat brush, I'll turn my brush up on the edge and use the very tip of the bristles. Fantastic. All right, so we've got our background done. Let's rinse out our small square brush, taking it all the way to the bottom of the cup. I'm going to wiggle it back and forth, almost like I'm stirring a cup of hot chocolate and all that chocolate's at the bottom of the cup. I'm going to bring over my blue towel. I'm going to grab my brush. It's nice and clean. Great job. All right, so we're ready to move on. We're gonna take our tan colored paint. So we wanna make sure it's the color that says tan, not the brown or the sienna, but the lightest of the colors that you have, that tan color. And we're gonna paint Shaggy's arm, his hand, his arm over here, his little part where his chest is showing, his neck, and all of his face. So I went ahead and in Sharpie marker, I outlined his eyes, his eyebrows, and his smile. And we're gonna paint right over those with the tan paint. And when we do that, those outlines will still show. Now the trick is, you wanna make sure you press the paint into the canvas, because if you take a big glob of paint and glob it onto your canvas, and your paint is really thick, you won't be able to see those lines. So this is an example of pressing your paint into the canvas, and this is what it would look like if you put a huge glob of paint on your canvas. So we want to make sure that we smooth out the paint and that it's a nice thin coat so that we can see all of those outlines in the background. So I'm going to use that small square brush, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to paint his face, the neck, the chest, the two arms, and his hand. And I'm painting right over his two eyebrows, up under his hair, remember, as we're working together, whatever device you're watching the video on, you can stop and pause it. You can take the video back if there's something that you missed in the step, or if you're painting a little bit faster and I'm going a little bit slower than you are, you can move the video forward. So I'm going to move on to the neck. Now very carefully I'm going to move on to the chest area. I'm going to start at the bottom with the edge of my brush. So I can get that nice little V shape. And then I will come across the top. Great, and then I'm going to move on to the back arm. So I'm going to take the canvas and I'm going to lift it up again, and I'm going to paint Shaggy's arm all the way off to the side of the picture. So if you went ahead and had accidentally painted this part yellow, just as long as it's dry, you can take the tan paint and paint right over the yellow and it will disappear. Not too bad if I don't say so myself. Alright, so now finally I'm going to move to the front arm with his wrist and his hand. Right, so same idea, I'm going to lift up the canvas and then I'm just going to finish painting the hand that's at the very bottom. Oh, now we can grab things. He's so happy to have his hand painted. Now we can go after the mystery and solve the mystery. Or have pizza or eat hamburgers. I'm really happy with how that turned out. He's looking really good. So we're done with the tan colored paint. So I'm going to rinse out this small square brush and get ready for blue, and this is going to be Scooby's collar and part of his dog tag that he has. So rinsing out that brush really nice. Alright, so here we are, the Scooby collar. So we're going to paint the collar, the outside of his charm, and the very inside of his charm is going to be in that blue color. Before we do that, I think what we're going to do is let's go ahead and lay down this yellow color on the inside with the letters S and D so it has time to dry while we're working on the blue of the collar. So let's do that first. So let me show you how to do that. Let's go ahead and grab our round brush. So it's going to be the one brush that size we haven't used yet. And let's go into that really pretty straight yellow paint. So I'm not mixing this with anything. I just want that super bold, bright color. I'm going to start just with the inside of Scooby's dog collar. And I'm going to paint this very inside part. And I think this will be much easier to paint first than trying to paint it after we paint that dark blue color. I'm going to come right up around the corner and down the sides. And then I've got these two lines that come down right here. So I'm going to take some yellow paint and I'm going to paint right over those lines with a little bit of yellow. So we're just going to highlight those lines with yellow. Then very carefully, with just a little tiny bit of paint at the tip of your brush, let's come in and let's color in the letters S for Scooby and the letter D for Do. So now we have Scooby-Doo. So just a little tiny bit of paint. Yeah, so let's get that yellow down first and we'll give it time to dry. Very nice. It's very, very thin, guys. I'm going to rinse the round brush, get rid of that yellow that we put on there, get a nice clean brush. I'm going to switch it out for a square brush, and then I'm going to start on the long part of his collar, now finally in this beautiful blue color. Oh, look at that. Look at this color, it's amazing. Okay, so I did these lines also in Sharpie marker in this black. We're gonna come and outline these again at the end of the painting, but I'm gonna be really careful to stay on either side of these black lines. If you go over them, no big deal. We can outline this part of the painting again at the very end, but I'm just going to be really careful to kind of stay on either side of those black lines. I'm going to jump over to the other side and I'm going to use the edge of my brush and I'm going to get the other side of the collar. Now if you don't like the square brush anymore, you can switch back to the round brush. And that might be easier to get into some of those smaller places. So I'm just going to put this in the water for a minute and I'll show you what that looks like. I'm going to switch back to the round brush, come back into my blue, and I can get into some of these smaller places. So now I'm going to get the rest of this dog collar. And I'm just grabbing the tiniest bit of paint at the very tip of the brush. And adding in a little bit of blue. So a tiny bit of paint, guys, will go a long way. Make sure you're not digging into the paint and grabbing a glob of paint. And do not stress if you go over the lines, because we can add some black at the very end to re-put in our lines. So take your time with this. This part is so much fun. It's got a little bit of detail, but it's so worth how it's going to turn out. Just a tiny bit. And you're going to have a lot of this color left over in your container, so hopefully you can use it for lots of other paintings that you do. Okay, I'm going to take this color all the way up to the very end, but I'm not going to go up anymore. I'm just going to go right up to where it meets the yellow. And that's perfect. So the next challenge on this collar is going to be on the very inside. We're going to go around the letters, Scooby-Doo, and inside the middle of the D. So don't forget about the inside of the D. Very light with the paintbrush. Don't push down hard, else those bristles are going to splat all over your canvas. Very, very light with your paintbrush, a little tiny bit of paint. There we go. I'm going to rinse off both paintbrushes. Take your time with this. When you're ready to move on, you can move on with me on the painting. If you need a few minutes though, go ahead and pause the video and start back up when you're ready. So I'm going to give this brush a good rinse. This glue is a little bit stubborn coming off the brush. Alright, I'm going to take a quick pause. I'm going to add some colors to my palette, and in a snap, I'll see you back. And just like that, mystery solved, we have the rest of our colors. We've got our brown, sienna, black, and our green. And now our color palette is complete, and we're ready to move on to the second part of our painting. So I'm going to set this aside, and we're going to get started. So the next thing that we're going to add is we're going to add the white inside of Scooby's eyes. So you can use either a square or a round brush. I'm going to grab a little bit of white paint, and I'm going to fill in the entire white circle of Scooby's eyes. And I'm going to go over the little circles that are on the inside. Those are going to end up being painted black. But I'm just going to use a really thin coat of white, and I want to make sure that I can see that pencil mark in the background, because that's not going to hurt anything. It'll just make it a little bit easier to paint over. I'm going to go on to the second eye, because we want to make sure that when this painting is over that he has white in his eyes and it doesn't just look like raw canvas in the background. There you go, Scooby. The expression on his face, he looks quite content, but I think he might be thinking about Scooby snacks. So if you have any Scooby snacks at home, you might want to give them a reward when you're done. Alright, fantastic. I'm going to get rid of the white paint that's on my round brush by giving it a good rinse. Great job. All right, so our next job in our painting is going to be to finally start painting Scooby-Doo. So I'm going to start from the top of Scooby, and I'm going to paint all of the brown that is inside of Scooby-Doo. And we can use a variety of brushes that we have. We've got a large square brush, we've got our medium little tiny square brush, and we've got a little tiny round brush. So these are all at your disposal to use. So we're going to go around his eyebrows, around the eyes that we painted, but we can go right over the black marks that are around his mouth, because we're going to come back over those with black paint at the end. So we're going to start at the top and we're going to paint the brown that is Scooby. Now this brown that we're using is a little bit translucent, which means that you'll be able to see some of the canvas peeking through. So you can see in my painting that I have finished already, some places are dark and some places are lighter. So if you want to put a second coat of brown paint on to make it a little bit darker, you can do that after the first coat dries. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to start with just the smaller of the square brushes. This is one of my favorite brushes to paint with because I like to paint up on the edge, or I like to use the flat side. I'm going to grab just a little bit of brown paint on my brush, not a lot. I'm going to start up at the very top and I'm going to start to paint Scooby-Doo. And one of the ways that I like to paint if I'm painting a big area is I'll give myself a little bit of an outline and then I'll fill in everything on the inside. I'm going to come around to here. One of the things that is neat about this brown color, and another reason why I decided to use Sharpie marker, is eventually we're going to paint these eyebrows in black. So if you find that you're having a hard time painting around the eyebrows, you can paint over them and you will see the outline of the marker in the background. So if you want to paint over the eyebrows, you can. You just want to be really careful and make sure that you go around the eyes, because if we accidentally paint those brown, we're going to have a really hard time making those white again. So I'm just going to take a few minutes and I'm very carefully going to go around my eyes for Scooby-Doo. In the brown paint, just very carefully. And again, use whatever brush is the best for you. So I like to use the square one because I like to use the very edge to get into tight places, but you may like to use the round brush. Or you may have some other brushes at home that you like to use. And then I'm going to paint right over the eyebrows, because I know that we're going to turn those and color those black out towards the end of the painting. Come up and get his other cute little ear. There we go. So his eyes will look a little bit goofy as we first start painting until we get those black eye outlines around. So right now he's going to look a little unfinished until we get all of those outlines. So if you're painting and you're like, oh my goodness, he looks a little crazy looking, don't worry about it. my tips and tricks for painting Scooby-Doo is this first coat of paint that we put on is very transparent, which actually works in our favor. And that's something that I really like about this color. So whenever I do the back of his head or down by underneath his chin, I'm going to use brush strokes that go up and down. So nice long brush strokes with this tiny square brush. And that's going to make him look like he has a nice long neck. Then when I do any lines that are by his mouth, I'm going to follow the curve of the lines by his mouth, and then that will give the illusion that he's three-dimensional, or that he's kind of popping off the page, because it'll look like those lines are nice and round. So one of the things that we learn in drawing really early is that anytime you want to make an object look round, you give it a curved line. So right underneath here, underneath his mouth, I'm going to make that look nice and round with my brush, and I'm just going to rock the brush back and forth. Then when I come up on top of his nose, I'm going to take the brush, and as I fill in, I'm going to follow the shape of the nose. You put a little paint on the brush. So I'm going to outline his nose. And then I'm going to start to paint this really cool little round line, following the shape of his nose. And then that'll give him kind of the illusion that he's got a nice round dog nose. So I'm going to come down and do the bottom part of Scooby. And again, I'm going to use just nice long lines for his body, going up and down, so that he looks nice and tall. Scooby's got that nice long neck. And lastly, when we're working on Scooby, let's not forget to do the very bottom of the canvas so that his body continues going all the way underneath. So you have that really great wrapped picture that looks like it came right out of a gallery. Great job. So when you're done with Scooby with that first coat of paint, we'll let it dry, and then you can decide if you want to come back and darken it up and put a second coat of paint. So in the meantime, we're going to move on to Shaggy's hair and then get him started as well. Alright, I'm going to keep the same brush for Shaggy, And we're gonna start with his hair. Same color as Scooby. We're gonna start in this section off to the side and this one right here. So Shaggy has some pretty neat spots on his hair to do. So if you've got the flyer that came with your kit, you can take a look at that too, and it'll show you all of the same coloring that it can help be a guide also. So we've got this section that comes down right here, this big portion across the top, and then two pieces on the side. So I'm gonna stick with this nice square brush. If you still need to use a smaller round one, you can switch to that one as well. So I'll probably stay with the square one for all of these brown areas in Shaggy's hair, and then switch to the round one when we do some of the smaller spaces for that sienna color. All right, so I'm gonna grab a little bit of brown, not too much, and I'm gonna start at the top. Then I'm going to move on to one of the side sections. So Scooby's still going to be pretty wet, so just be careful that your arm doesn't rest onto the paint. I'm going to continue this right down on the side. And then there's a little piece right here. I'm going to see if I can get this with the square brush. A couple sections on the side. Furthest towards his arms. His hair looks so good right now because he hasn't been out fighting any crime and solving any mysteries. And then last piece is going to come right close to his face. Great. So as I'm working, I'm gonna go ahead and take a look at Scooby and Shaggy and see if there's any parts that I want to add another coat of the brown paint to. So I'm gonna take a few minutes and add another coat of paint to Scooby, and I'll show you what that second coat looks like. It'll make him a little bit less transparent and give him more of a solid look, or an opaque look, as we call it in art. Give him more of a solid coat. While I'm painting, if I go over these black lines with a second coat of paint, I can still see the black lines. They start to disappear a little bit, but they're there enough for me to come back over when it's time for me to add some of the details in black. So you should be just fine. You just want to make sure that it's the same idea, that you're not using a glob of paint, that you're still using a nice thin coat, and that you're taking all of the paint and pushing it into the canvas. With my brush strokes, I'm still going to use the same movement that I did when I first did the painting. I'm still gonna kind of rock those lines. So if any of the brush strokes do show, it has some movement. But I like how this looks with the second coat of paint on it. So go ahead and take a few minutes and you can add some touch-ups to your brown paint. And when you're ready, we'll go ahead and unpause the video and then continue. Great, so now we're ready to move on and we're gonna start adding some of the black to our painting, which is gonna really make things pop out. So we're gonna take our square brush and we're gonna start adding our black to the nose of Scooby so he can smell out all of the mysteries and his Scooby snacks. And right away, this painting really starts to come to life. Just adding a little bit of black to the painting is amazing. Oh, his nose is so cute. There you go, Scooby. Alright, that is wonderful. Look at it. You look so good, Scoob. Alright, I'm going to switch brushes. This one's a little bit too big. I'm just going to set it in the water for a few minutes while I switch over to my round brush. I'm going to come up and very carefully, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate my canvas so that the eyes and the eyebrows are up towards, well, my right hand side. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paint in his cute little Scooby eyebrows. Wow, that makes him look so good. Give him his two little Scooby brows. And then very carefully, I'm going to paint in the little round dots for his eyes. So again, just a little tiny paint on the tip of your brush. Very light, guys, with your paintbrush. Wow, that makes all the difference in the entire world. Shaggy. I'm going to turn Shaggy very carefully so that Shaggy is sideways facing me. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to paint in Shaggy's eyes very carefully, very light. Just a little bit of paint on my brush. This is always one of my favorite parts of painting, is when we get to put the eyes in. They get their little personalities. It's like, oh, thank you so much. This eye is getting out of control. I'm painting it and it's getting bigger and bigger. I'm just going to go with it. There you go, bud. Okay. I'm going to do his eyebrows next. Let's add our sienna to Shaggy's hair. I'm gonna rinse out both my brushes really good. We definitely have a mystery swamp colored green going on in our glass now. It's quite a weird color. I'm going to use the round brush. I'm going to go into that really gorgeous sienna, kind of that reddish brown color. And very carefully, I'm going to paint in all of the other white spots that are hanging out in Shaggy's hair. So if this is still wet, let's go ahead and rotate our canvas so you can get into Shaggy's hair a little bit easier. Just be careful of those eyes that we just painted. Alright, so Shaggy's got that sienna in his hair. He's got some of those accent colors going on. I'm going to take my picture and turn it back in the correct direction, and everybody's starting to look really good. Alright, so the moment that I have been waiting for, besides that gorgeous blue color, we are going to fill in Shaggy's torso of the minifig with this gorgeous green, this classic color for Shaggy. Now, this color is a little bit transparent. Green is always a little bit transparent when you paint with it. So if you want to use 2 coats to really darken it that color, just like we did with Scooby, you can let the first layer dry, and then you can come over it and paint with a second layer. So the same thing with Scooby-Doo is I went ahead and outlined a couple of the areas for Shaggy in marker, because those are some of the lines that we're going to highlight a little bit later. And then that way it'll be much easier. I'm using a small square brush, and then to do this little delicate line underneath his neck, I'm going to use the very edge of the brush. I'm going to go right along that little line right there. But if you'd like to use a different brush, maybe that little round one, you can try that one also. This is a great fun color to paint with. Oh my goodness, I love this. It's so bright. Okay, and same idea that we did with the background and the hand. We want to make sure that we get the very bottom edge of the canvas, and we don't forget about that. So I'm going to lift up the canvas and get that bottom edge. And go all the way next to Scooby. They are standing back to back because they are buds forever. They have been solving mysteries together for a very long time. Okay friends, so this is a really great time. Take a look at your painting. If there's anything that you want to add a second coat of paint to, now is a great time. So if you want to add a second coat of paint to the collar, to Shaggy's shirt, or to the hair, or if you need a second coat of paint in Scooby-Doo's nose, now's a great time to do that, because we're going to finish up our painting with some of our highlights and some of our really fun details. So let's go ahead and take a few minutes. You can pause the video and then start it up when you're ready, and I'll see you back in a few minutes. All right, so welcome back. We're ready to add our highlights to our pictures and our details, and this is really going to make everything come to life. So we want to make sure that our picture is dry to the touch. I went ahead myself and added a second coat to Shaggy's shirt and a little bit more to his hair, just to give it a little bit more of a solid look. We're going to start with a square brush, and I'm going to go into the white paint, and I'm going to grab just a little bit on the very tip of the bristles, so I'm barely grabbing any paint. I'm going to find a clean area on my plate, and I'm going to tap off as much paint as I can, which seems a little counterproductive since I just put paint on my brush. Then I'm going to create what's known as a very dry brush, so I have just the tiniest bit of paint on to do some highlighting with. I'm going to start with Scooby's nose, and again my picture is just very dry now to the touch. We want to make sure our picture is dry so we don't smear any paint. I'm going to take this brush and scrub it back and forth, and I'm going to give Scooby a little bit of a highlight right across the very tip of his nose. So what's great about this technique is if I want that line to be a little bit brighter, then I can add a little bit more paint to it. But before I do, I'm always going to tap my brush off on the plate because I just want a very dry brush. So I'm going to highlight Scooby's nose, and already he looks like he's coming to life. I'm going to come up and do the same thing across the very top of his ear. And I'm kind of following the curved shape of his ear. And then I'm going to do the same thing following the outside line of his second ear. So I'm grabbing just a little bit of paint, tapping hard onto my plate, and then I'm going to rock back and forth following the outside line of his ear. So if that line is really light, you can add a little bit more paint to it. Remember, not too much. There we go. All right, Scooby's collar. Right now it looks really flat, so I'm going to come and I'm going to spread long ways across the very top of his collar. I'm going to grab a little bit more paint. I'm going to move my brush back and forth. And I'm going to give him a little bit of a highlight on the top of his collar. Cool, you look good, Scooby-Doo. All right, let's go over to Shaggy's hair. I'm going to follow this little curve on either side. I'm not going to add much more paint to my brush. I really want a really dry brush for this. Adding just a little bit of highlight on either side. I grabbed a little too much paint there, so it's super white, so I'm actually just going to use some of that extra paint that I had. And I'm going to follow the very top of his hair. So we're just giving a little bit of dimension and highlights to make this feel a little bit more 3D than what it already is. And I'm going to follow the line on the top of his shoulder. Just give him a little bit of a highlight on the top of the shoulder. I'm done with the square brush with all of my white highlights, so I'm going to pop this into the water and I'm just going to leave it right there. I'm going to take my round brush and I'm going to custom mix a color, and we're going to add some of the material lines that are on Shaggy's minifig top. There's going to be 2 lines that we're going to add. So I'm going to take a little tiny bit of black and move it towards my green. I'm going to take a little bit of green and I'm going to smash them together until I get a little bit of an army green color. So I'm just adding a tiny bit of black. So we're going to change the tint of our green. I'm just going to use the tip of my brush to mix these around. If it gets a little bit too dark, you can add a little bit more of that really pretty green to it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and rinse my brush off in the water to get off any extra paint. I just want a little bit of paint at the tip of my brush. So putting it in that custom mix, I'm going to add 2 lines, moving from the bottom of the side up towards a little bit past the V-neck. And we'll add a couple details to the shirt. I think he likes it. He doesn't have a smile in quite yet. I haven't put that there, but I think he's digging this shirt. All right, I'm going to rinse this out and we're going to add all of our gorgeous black details. All right, so there's a couple ways that we can do this. So I want to show you a couple quick tips and kind of insider tricks to the paintings. All right, tip number 1, when it comes to outlining in black, there are 2 ways that we can do that. The first way is we're going to use our round paintbrush, then we break the surface of the water with our paintbrush, which means we just barely get the tip of it wet. Then we grab a little bit of black paint and we make almost something consistency-wise to what a watercolor would be. So it's like we're making something that feels like the ink coming out of a pen. And you'll see I have just a little bit on the side. So if I were to move my paint over, if I hold my brush like a pencil, I could almost take my paintbrush and write letters with it. And it's like my paintbrush could hold a lot of ink. It almost feels like ink. So I don't know if anybody's out there named Jenny today, but if you are, that's what your name would look like. So I break the surface of the water. I grab a little bit of black paint so it feels like a watercolor. And on my paper, it feels like a pen, and I can write for a very, very long time. So when I outline, I'll start with Shaggy. I'm going to turn Shaggy towards me. I'm going to grab a little bit of this ink that I've made for myself with a tiny bit of black. The very tip of my round brush. And then I'm going to hold it right where the gold meets the blue, right where the barrel meets the handle. And I'm going to use it just like a pencil. And I can use that to start outlining. So I'm going to do my mouth, and then I'm going to give him 6 lines for his little whiskers on his chin. Then I'm going to move down, and I'm going to retrace over this black line that I did in Sharpie marker for his shirt. So I'm still using that same technique. I break the water with the tip of my round brush. I grab a little bit of black paint, but I'm moving it to the side so I make like an ink pen. And then I'm going to come in, and then I'm going to add my lines. And the entire time I'm holding this exactly like I would a pen. I'm going to add in the V. To his neck. And then I'm going to add this nice long line coming down. So as I'm working, I'm going to start turning the canvas. Because it's much easier for me to drag my paintbrush down, because if I try to push my paintbrush, the bristles are going to spread apart. And I'm going to take that line all the way down. And then I'll hang my little pinky on here so my hand doesn't slip. Okay, so I promised that I would show you 2 ways. Okay, so this is the first way. The second way is I can use a good old Sharpie marker, but I have to make sure that my picture is completely dry, because if it's not, my Sharpie marker is not going to work. It's going to get stuck in the paint. So you can have, if you're a young one and you're working on these paintings, you can have an adult help you with this. But if you're a little bit older, this shouldn't be a problem for you. You can take a Sharpie marker, and then you can add in your lines with a Sharpie marker. So another line that we're going to be adding is this long line that comes straight down to the arm. So I can just add that in with the Sharpie marker. My only recommendation is that if you have Sharpie markers at home, test them on a piece of paper to make sure that the ink is still wet and that it's not dry, so that it actually really works. I've got a ton of Sharpie markers, but the ink wears out really fast for me. I'm also going to add a line where the sleeve is. And then we're going to go straight across the top and down the side. So once you add these colors in black, your picture's really going to pop out and feel kind of like that cartoonish Lego feel. So I'm going to continue with a paintbrush, but again, anything that we're doing with the brush, you can definitely do with the Sharpie marker. So I'm going to grab a little bit more black ink, and I'm just going to go right over these Sharpie lines, so it has that kind of painting feel. beautiful. We're gonna do his arm sleeve. So again, I'm using my paintbrush now just like it's a pencil. And then I'm going to turn towards Scooby-Doo. I'm going to do an outline of his collar. Around his dog tag. So again, just a little tiny bit of black paint with that water. And then if you feel really brave, you can do around the letters S and D for Scooby-Doo, or you can leave those just as they are. It's a little bit more tricky. Good. And then finally, for the last parts of Scooby-Doo, we're gonna go around the eyes, and then we're going to trace over the mouth, the marks for the mouth. So I'm going to start with the one at the bottom. We've got one line, two, right up to his nose, and right over the bridge of his nose, and then right around his eyes. And then I'm going to give him a little line underneath his eyes to give him a little bit of expression. Good job, and that's all of our outlining in black. So our characters are missing the little gleam inside their eyes. So using the round brush, I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to use the back side, and I'm going to dip it into the white paint, and I'm going to put a little dot inside of Scooby's eyes and a dot high up in Shaggy's eyes. So for me, Shaggy got a little bit carried away. I had a hard time keeping those eyes small, so he's got some nice big Lego eyes. He can solve mysteries, really good guys. I'm going to wipe the end off the brush, or the back end of the brush. I'll put the other end inside. And then we're going to add just a little bit of shadow to Shaggy, and we're going to be done, and he's going to look so amazing. So I'm going to go over to my tan colored paint that I started out with. I'm going to tap a little bit of the brown into it. So I'm taking tan and brown, and I'm going to make just a little bit shade darker. So we're going to use that dry brushing technique that we used for Scooby-Doo's highlight on his collar, on his ears, and on Shaggy's head. So now I'm going to find a clean spot on the plate, and I've got a nice dry brush to do some shadowing. So on Shaggy, right underneath his chin, I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to move it back and forth, and I'm going to give him a little bit of a shadow underneath his neck, and then just on the side of his cheek. And that's really going to make his face pop out and look three-dimensional. And then right on the top of his hand, I'm going to add a little bit of this darker color and onto his wrist. And that's going to give him just a little bit of pop, a little bit of extra color to help him stand out. So congratulations everybody on your amazing Scooby-Doo painting. You have done a fantastic job today, and I hope to paint again with you soon. Have a wonderful day, everyone.